Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material. So I want you to imagine waking up to just an absolute nightmare.
Oh, man.
Yeah, you look out your window, and parked right on your national border are 30,000 enemy war chariots. The soldiers are heavily armored, highly trained, and, completely ruthless.
Right.
And then you look at your own army, and your troops are terrified, like they are literally hiding in caves and thickets. But it gets worse.
It always does.
Exactly. Yeah. Your military is suffering from this massive systemic technological disadvantage. You don't have chariots, you don't have swords. In fact, the enemy has instituted such a strict monopoly on metallurgy that there isn't a single blacksmith allowed in your entire country.
Which is just a crazy strategic disadvantage.
Right. If your farmers want to sharpen a pitchfork or an axe, they have to hike down to an enemy garrison and pay exorbitant prices just to use a file. You are basically facing a mechanized, apocalyptic military force with farming equipment. That is the sheer, terrifying reality we are dropping you into today.
It really is a stunning historical scenario, and it's the ultimate pressure test for a leader, right?
Absolutely.
Like, what happens to a person's core principles when the clock is ticking, the army is abandoning ship, and destruction just seems imminent? So today we are immersing ourselves in the ancient text of 1 Samuel, specifically chapters 8 through 15.
Yeah.
We're tracking this massive, turbulent societal shift in ancient Israel. We're going to watch a nation transition from a loose, decentralized tribal confederacy into a centralized monarchy.
Right. A huge shift.
Huge. And at the center of this storm are two deeply compelling figures. You have the aging prophet Samuel, who is navigating a really painful transition of power, and Saul, who becomes Israel's very first king.
We'll be drawing heavily on the text itself, obviously, but also bringing in the profound historical and psychological insights of classic commentaries by Matthew Henry and Albert Barnes.
Yeah, and I was looking through the notes from Barnes and Henry, and what strikes me right away is just how incredibly modern the psychology is.
Oh, complete.
I mean, we were talking about events that happened roughly 3,000 years ago, yet the underlying human behaviors are exactly what you'd see in a modern corporate boardroom, or like a modern political campaign.
Definitely.
It's a masterclass in the desperation to fit in, the crushing weight of sudden leadership, the instinct to cover up our mistakes, and the profound difference between just looking the part and actually having the character to survive a crisis. So let's get right into it. Where are we starting? Like, what is the political and social climate as we open the book on this era? Well, the scene opens with this pervasive sense of decay and exhaustion. Samuel, who has been this towering figure of integrity, a prophet and a judge who has led Israel faithfully for decades, well, he's getting old.
Right.
Matthew Henry makes an interesting observation here, actually. He suggests that Samuel probably wasn't even past 60 at this point.
Wait, really? 60 isn't even that old.
Right, but Samuel had borne the heavy, unrelenting weight of public service since he was a literal child. The stress of constant leadership, of mediating disputes, of guiding a nation that had aged him prematurely, he is just exhausted.
That makes sense.
So to ease his own burden and to try and set up some kind of succession plan, he appoints his two sons, Joel and Abijah, as judges.
And Barnes notes a geographical detail here that feels really intentional. He points out that Samuel places his sons in Beersheba, which was on the extreme southern frontier of Judah.
Yeah, way out there.
Right, so it feels like Samuel's losing his grip, right? He's central, but he's trying to secure the borders by putting his family in charge. But it backfires spectacularly.
It is a complete disaster. His sons are entirely corrupt. The text is brutal in its assessment. It says they do not walk in Samuel's ways. They turn aside after dishonest gain. They take bribes, and they pervert justice.
It's the classic tragic story of nepotism destroying a legacy. You have this towering figure of absolute integrity in Samuel, and his kids are essentially running a shakedown operation on the border.
Exactly.
Matthew Henry has a really sharp commentary on this. He points out that the love of money is the root of all evil, but it is especially catastrophic in judges or civic leaders. There is something uniquely devastating when the public justice system, the very institution designed to protect the vulnerable, becomes the instrument of their oppression. I mean, it breaks the social contract entirely.
It does. And that broken social contract is the catalyst for everything that follows. The elders of Israel, the tribal leaders, they've had enough. They gather together, travel to Samuel at his home in Ramah, and they issue a unified demand.
Yeah.
They say, look, you are old, and your sons don't walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations.
Man, that had to be a gut punch for Samuel.
Oh, a massive one.
He's dedicated his entire life to serving these people, and they just show up at his house to tell him his kids are crooks and his life's work needs to be completely overhauled.
Yeah, and the text tells us the thing displeased him, but we really have to look deeper at why it displeased him. Yes, the personal rejection hurt. Yes, having his family's failures thrown in his face was painful. But his real grief wasn't about his bruised ego.
What was it about then?
It was about what their demand represented. By saying, give us a king to judge us like all the nations, they were rejecting the unique divine system they already had. Up to this point, Israel operated as a kind of theocracy. When they were in trouble, they relied on an unseen God to raise up charismatic deliverers, the judges, to save them.
But that system requires an immense amount of faith.
It does.
It requires living with uncertainty. You have to wait for a leader to emerge. You don't have a standing army. You don't have a visible monarch sitting on a throne wearing a purple robe that you could point to and say, there, that guy is going to keep me safe. They looked around at the Philistines, the Ammonites, the Moabites, all these neighboring nations, and they saw visible, tangible security. They saw kings. They saw bureaucracies. They saw standing armies. And they wanted that.
That's the core of the issue. They wanted to trade the unique, demanding freedom of relying on the unseen for the visible, tangible, but ultimately oppressive security of a human monarch. When Samuel takes this demand to prayer, he is just heartbroken.
Yeah.
And God's response to him is one of the most revealing statements in the text. God says, listen to the voice of the people in all that they tell you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them.
I think we do exactly the same thing today, just in different forms.
Oh, for sure.
If you were listening to this deep dive right now, think about how often we trade our unique freedoms or our core values just to assimilate. It reminds me of the modern experience of signing up for a new app or social media platform.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. You're downloading it, and this massive terms of service contract pops up on your screen. It's 50 pages of dense legal text. Nobody reads it. You just know that all your friends are on this app. The interface looks sleek. It promises to connect you or solve some problem, and you just want in.
Exactly. You just click accept.
You blindly click, I agree. You trade away your privacy, your data, and your digital freedom just to have the visible convenience that everyone else has. The Israelites are blindly clicking, I agree, to a monarchy because they want a visible fix for their national anxiety.
That is a phenomenal way to understand what is happening here. And what's fascinating is that Samuel, operating as a kind of ancient consumer protection advocate, actually tries to force them to read the fine print of that terms of service contract.
He does.
God tells Samuel to give them a stark warning about the manner of the king who will rule over them.
Right. He lays out exactly what this new system is going to cost.
He does, and it's an extensive, terrifying list. Samuel warns them. He says, this king you want so badly, he's going to draft your sons to run before his chariots and fight in his standing army. He's going to take your daughters to be his perfumers, his cooks, and his bakers.
Wow.
Yeah, and he is going to appropriate the absolute best of your fields, your vineyards, and your olive groves and give them to his political cronies. And on top of all of that, he is going to levy a heavy tax, a tenth of your seed and your flocks.
So he's basically outlining a bureaucratic nightmare.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Samuel is warning them about bureaucratic bloat, military conscription, eminent domain, and heavy taxation. He concludes the warning by saying, you will cry out in that day because of your king whom you have chosen, and the Lord will not answer you.
He's spelling it out so clearly, like, this institution you think is going to save you is actually going to enslave you. And yet they don't care. The people refuse to listen.
They don't care at all.
They say, no, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. They literally just want someone else to do the heavy lifting of fighting.
Exactly.
Barnes points out that there was a looming military threat at this time. A king named Nahash the Ammonite was making aggressive warlike movements on the border. So the Israelites are operating out of pure, unadulterated panic.
Which brings up a critical point about how we read this text. It is very easy to read Samuel's warning and conclude that this entire narrative is inherently anti-monarchy or universally anti-government.
Sure, sounds like it.
But if we dig into the deeper wisdom here, the warning is actually about the dangers of idolatry. It's a warning against placing our ultimate, unquestioning trust in human systems.
How do you mean? Like expecting too much from politicians?
Precisely. The text isn't claiming that human government is inherently evil or unnecessary. It is making a profound psychological and theological point. Expecting a human leader, a political party, or a structural system to be a perfect savior will inevitably lead to oppression and disappointment.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right. When you elevate a human being or a human institution to the status of a god, expecting them to solve all your anxieties and provide absolute security, they will eventually demand the sacrifices that only a god can demand. They will demand your children, your wealth, and your freedom.
That is heavy, but it is so applicable. When we demand a quick, visible fix to internal or structural problems, we almost always end up paying a massive hidden tax.
Yes.
If you're listening, think about the kings you have installed in your own life to make you feel safe. Maybe it's a relentless pursuit of status. Maybe it's an obsession with accumulating wealth. Maybe it's idolizing a specific thought leader or politician, believing that if they just get enough power, everything will be fine. You have to ask yourself, what are the quiet taxes those kings are levying on your peace of mind? What is that obsession with status costing you in your actual offline relationships? What is that reliance on wealth costing your physical health? We all have kings. We just rarely read the terms of service.
That's a really necessary reflection, because once Israel demands this king, they get exactly what they asked for. And the man who steps onto the stage is a fascinating study in contradictions. We are introduced to Saul.
I love the way the narrative introduces him.
That is.
It's almost cinematic. We're told he is from the tribe of Benjamin.
Right.
And Matthew Henry notes that Benjamin was the smallest tribe in Israel, having been heavily diminished by a brutal civil war in the past. But despite his marginalized background, Saul himself is incredibly impressive. He's described as a choice, handsome young man. In fact, he's taller than anyone else in Israel from the shoulders up. If you were going to cast a king in a movie, you would cast Saul. He looks invincible.
He really has the aesthetic of leadership perfected. But look at his actual circumstances when we meet him. He isn't leading an army. He isn't studying statecraft or law. He is wandering the countryside looking for his father Kish's lost donkeys.
Which is such a mundane, almost comedic introduction for a future monarch.
It is incredibly humble. In an agrarian society, donkeys were valuable economic assets. So his father sends him out, and Saul wanders for days with his servant, completely unsuccessfully. They are exhausted, they are out of food, and Saul is ready to give up and go home, worried that his father is now going to be stressing about them instead of the livestock.
Right.
But his servant suggests they consult a man of God who happens to be in a nearby city in the land of Zuph. This man of God, of course, is Samuel.
And there's this incredibly human moment where Saul is worried about the consulting fee.
Yeah.
He tells his servant, "We have no bread left to give as a present. What do we bring the man?" And then the servant steps up and says, "I have the fourth part of a shekel of silver."
A quarter shekel, yeah.
Barnes notes this was a very small coin, likely a full shekel, that had been literally divided by a cross into quarters. Henry points out that this wasn't a bribe to buy a prophecy. It was simply a standard cultural token of respect for a prophet's time. So they head toward the city. They run into some young women drawing water who tell them to hurry because the seer has just arrived to bless a sacrifice, and they walk right into Samuel.
And this is where we see the hidden architecture of the narrative. This entire sequence, the lost donkeys, a helpful servant with a quarter shekel, the timing of the maidens at the well, it seems like a string of random frustrations and coincidences.
Yeah, totally random.
But the day before, God had privately revealed to Samuel that he was going to send a man from the tribe of Benjamin to be the prince over Israel. The moment Samuel lays eyes on Saul, he gets the internal confirmation. Behold the man. What follows is a deeply symbolic sequence that demonstrates a core principle. The role equips the person. Samuel treats Saul with immense honor. He gives him the chief place at a feast with 30 distinguished guests. He even reserves a specific cut of meat for him, the shoulder.
The shoulder? Why the shoulder?
Well, Matthew Henry observes the symbolism here, noting that the shoulder denotes strength and the heavy burden of government that Saul is about to bear.
Oh, that's fascinating. And then we get to the private anointing. It's early the next morning. Samuel sends the servant on ahead, takes a vial of oil, and pours it over Saul's head. Henry points out that the oil was in a brittle vial, not a durable horn, which perhaps foreshadows the fragile, temporary nature of Saul's dynasty.
Good point.
But Samuel doesn't just pour oil on him and walk away. He knows Saul is going to doubt this. So he gives him 3 highly specific, verifiable signs that will happen on his journey home.
The precision of the signs is vital, Samuel tells him. First, you will meet 2 men by Rachel's tomb who will tell you the donkeys are found and your father is worried about you.
Okay, very specific.
Right. Second, you will meet 3 men going up to Bethel, 1 carrying 3 kids, 1 carrying 3 loaves of bread, and 1 carrying a bottle of wine. They will greet you and give you 2 loaves of bread.
Wow.
And third, when you reach the hill of God, you will meet a company of prophets coming down with musical instruments prophesying. The Spirit of the Lord will come upon you, and you will prophesy with them and be turned into another man.
And the text explicitly says that as Saul turned his back to leave Samuel, God gave him another heart. All the signs come to pass exactly as predicted.
Yep.
When Saul joins the prophets, the Spirit hits you so mightily that people who knew him are shocked. They start saying, is Saul also among the prophets? It becomes a local proverb. He has this profound, undeniable spiritual awakening. He is internally transformed and equipped for the throne.
He receives the capacity for the calling. But this brings us to one of the most perplexing and relatable moments in the text.
Right, because I really have to push back on the narrative here.
Go for it.
If Saul just had this undeniable spiritual experience, I mean, if he was literally given another heart by God, and all these incredibly specific signs came true, why, when it comes time for the public coronation, does he completely choke?
It's a great question.
Samuel gathers all the tribes at Mizpah. They cast lots to publicly select the king. The lot falls to the tribe of Benjamin, then to the family of Matri, and finally to Saul, the son of Kish. They call his name out in front of the entire nation, and he is nowhere to be found.
Yeah, he's gone.
They literally have to ask God where the guy is, and the answer is, behold, he hath hid himself among the stuff or among the baggage. I mean, is this genuine humility, or is this just massive cowardice? It seems entirely contradictory to having a new heart.
It does seem contradictory if we assume that a spiritual experience or a new title instantly eradicates human psychology, but it doesn't.
Right.
Matthew Henry's commentary untangles this beautifully. He suggests that Saul was likely experiencing a crushing wave of what we would today call imposter syndrome.
Oh, interesting.
Despite the private anointing, he was suddenly thrust in front of hundreds of thousands of people. He wasn't bred for courts or armies, he was a farmer. Henry also notes that Saul might have deeply feared the envy of his neighbors, knowing that elevating someone from the smallest tribe would cause political friction.
That makes a lot of sense.
And of course, there was the looming, terrifying military threat of the Philistines and the Ammonites. To be king meant you had to lead an army against a superior force.
So the new heart gave him the capacity, but it didn't magically delete his anxiety.
Exactly. It highlights an uncomfortable truth about human growth. Getting the promotion, receiving the title, or even having a profound moment of clarity doesn't erase your deepest insecurities. The courage is planted, but the instinct to flee is still highly active.
I completely relate to this. I remember years ago, I was given my first real leadership role managing a large team. I had trained for it, I had the credentials, I wanted the job. But on the day of my first all-hands meeting where I had to stand up and cast a vision, I literally hid in a bathroom stall for 10 minutes.
Wow. Yeah, I think we've all been there.
My stomach was in knots. I kept thinking, I have no idea what I'm doing. The baggage looks different today. You know, it's a restroom stall instead of a pile of ancient luggage. But the instinct is identical. We self-sabotage because the gap between knowing you're called to something and actually walking onto the stage is terrifying.
And that is the practical takeaway here. When you are stepping into a new level of responsibility, whether that's a new career path, a demanding relationship, or a creative endeavor, notice your urge to hide in the baggage. Acknowledge the fear. It is a completely normal human reaction to the weight of expectations. But you cannot stay in the luggage. You have to step out, trusting that the challenges ahead of you are exactly what will continue to forge the character you need to succeed.
And to Saul's credit, he does eventually step out. They run and fetch him from the baggage. When he stands among the people, he towers over everyone, and the crowd goes wild, shouting, "God save the king!" But the honeymoon is short-lived. Not everyone is happy. The text mentions a group called the children of Belial who despise him.
Yes, and we need to clarify that term. Belial essentially means worthless or lawless. These were detractors, political opponents who looked at this farmer from the smallest tribe and said, "How shall this man save us?"
So they just rejected him from the start.
Exactly. And to show their contempt, they brought him no presents. In that cultural context, bringing a gift to a newly crowned monarch wasn't just polite, it was a formal pledge of allegiance. By refusing the gift, they were publicly, politically rejecting his authority.
Which is a massive insult right out of the gate.
Cool.
But Saul handles it remarkably well. The text says he held his peace. He acts as though he is deaf to their insults. But his real test as a leader isn't going to be how he handles domestic critics. It's going to be how he handles a foreign crisis.
Right, chapter 11.
Exactly. That brings us to chapter 11. The Ammonite threat that everyone was worried about finally materializes. King Nahash marches his army up and besieges the Israelite city of Jabesh-Gilead. The city leaders realize they are vastly outmatched, so they attempt to negotiate a surrender. They tell Nahash, "Make a covenant with us, and we will serve thee."
But Nahash isn't just looking for subjects. He is looking to humiliate and permanently neutralize Israel. He offers them peace, but with a gruesome, sadistic condition. He says, "On this condition will I make a covenant with you, that I may thrust out all your right eyes and lay it for a reproach upon all Israel."
I have to pause here because when you read that, it just sounds like comic book villain cruelty. Why specifically the right eye?
Well, it's not just random cruelty. It is calculated military strategy. In ancient phalanx or shield wall warfare, a soldier held a massive shield in his left hand. Because of the size of the shield, it naturally covered the entire left side of his body, including the left side of his face and his left eye. A soldier's combat vision, his ability to see the enemy, aim a weapon, and maintain the line relied almost entirely on his right eye peering around the edge of the shield.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, by blinding the right eye, Nahash wasn't just torturing them, he was permanently, systematically disabling them from ever fighting in a shield wall again. It was a strategy of total demilitarization through mutilation. The elders of Jabesh are horrified, and they ask for a 7-day delay to see if anyone in Israel will come to their rescue.
Messengers run throughout the country and eventually arrive in Saul's hometown of Gibeah. And where is the newly crowned king? He is literally out in the field walking behind a herd of oxen. He hasn't even established a royal court yet.
Still just a farmer at heart.
Right. He hears the people of his town weeping. He asks what happened, and they relay the horrific terms Nahash has offered to Jabesh-Gilead. And this is where we see the peak of Saul's potential. The text says the Spirit of God comes upon him, and his anger is kindled greatly. He takes a yoke of oxen, the very animals he was plowing with, hews them into pieces, and sends the bloody chunks of meat throughout all the coasts of Israel via messengers.
The symbolism of that act is intense and deeply coercive.
But absolutely, he sends a message with the pieces. "Whosoever cometh not forth after Saul and after Samuel, so shall it be done unto his oxen." Now, we have to understand the economic weight of this. In an agrarian society, a yoke of oxen isn't just a pair of animals. It's a family's tractor, their livelihood, their means of survival.
Yeah, that's a huge threat.
Saul is effectively saying, if you do not mobilize to protect your brothers in Jabesh-Gilead, I will personally destroy your local economy. I will bankrupt you. And the text says the fear of the Lord fell on the people, and they came out with one consent. He rallies a staggering army of 330,000 men.
It is a breathtaking display of decisive action, and it provides a crucial modern translation regarding the nature of anger.
How so?
We often view anger as inherently destructive or unspiritual, but apathy in the face of profound cruelty is not a virtue. Witnessing systemic injustice or seeing vulnerable people threatened with mutilation and oppression should make us angry. Righteous anger, when channeled into protective, organized action rather than just erratic violence, is a vital component of effective leadership. Saul doesn't just sit around lamenting how terrible the world is. He leverages his anger to mobilize a nation and protect the defenseless.
He sends word back to Jabesh-Gilead, "Tomorrow, by that time the sun be hot, ye shall have help." And he delivers. He organizes his massive militia into 3 companies, executes a brilliant, coordinated pre-dawn strike against the Ammonite camp, and completely massacres them.
A total victory.
The text says those who remained were so scattered that no 2 of them were left together. It is a stunning, undeniable military triumph. Saul has definitively proven that he can lead. He isn't just a tall farmer anymore. He is a warlord.
But the true core wisdom of this chapter isn't found in the tactical brilliance of the dawn raid. It is found in what happens immediately after the dust settles. True leadership is ultimately confirmed by magnanimity, not just military might.
Let's look at that aftermath. The adrenaline is pumping. The Israelites have just achieved an impossible victory. They are feeling absolutely invincible, and suddenly the mob turns its attention inward. The people go to Samuel and demand, "Who is he that said, 'Shall Saul reign over us? Bring the men, that we may put them to death.'"
Yeah, they want revenge.
They remember those children of Belial from the coronation who refused to bring gifts, and the mob wants blood. They want to use the momentum of this national victory to settle old political scores and purge the opposition.
And this is where Saul shines brightest in his entire career. He steps in front of the mob and issues a total veto. He declares, "There shall not a man be put to death this day, for today the Lord hath wrought salvation in Israel."
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate for a second. Is this really profound character? Or is he just riding the high of a victory? Maybe he's just in a good mood and doesn't want an execution ruining the after party.
Well, it's much deeper than a good mood. If we look at comparative insights from history and philosophy, Saul is demonstrating the highest ideal of leadership. Think of the Stoic concept of the philosopher king, or modern theories of post-conflict resolution like Nelson Mandela's approach after apartheid, or Abraham Lincoln's desire for malice toward none after the Civil War.
Right.
True power is demonstrated not in crushing your opposition when you finally have the upper hand, but in showing supreme restraint. Saul realizes something crucial. Executing his critics right now would fracture the fragile national unity he just bled to build. By showing absolute clemency, he neuters his opposition. He transforms potential political martyrs into relieved, grateful subjects. It is an act of profound political intelligence.
That makes perfect sense. It's so easy to punch down when you've just won. If you're listening to this deep dive, think about how you handle vindication. Think of a recent moment where you were proven right in a heated argument. Or maybe you achieved a success at work that a specific colleague said you couldn't pull off.
Yeah.
When you finally won, did you use that victory to punish the people who doubted you? Did you rub it in their faces or try to get them fired? Or did you use that moment of undeniable leverage to build a bridge? Saul had the power to say, "I told you so" with a sword.
Yeah.
Instead, he said, "We share this victory together." That requires a massive amount of emotional regulation.
It does. And following this incredible display of grace, the entire nation goes to Gilgal to officially renew the kingdom. They sacrifice peace offerings, and Saul and all the men of Israel rejoice greatly. The transition seems to be a total success. Which brings us to chapter 12. This is the moment of the official transfer of power. Samuel is stepping down as the civic leader, handing the reins entirely to Saul.
And Samuel's farewell address is absolutely wild. I don't think we fully appreciate how shocking this speech is.
It really is.
Samuel stands before the hundreds of thousands of Israelites, with the newly minted King Saul right beside him, and he demands a public, comprehensive audit of his entire lifelong career. He says to the crowd, "Witness against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Or whose ass have I taken? Or whom have I defrauded? Whom have I oppressed? Or of whose hand have I received any bribe to blind mine eyes therewith? And I will restore it to you."
It is a breathtaking moment of vulnerability and confidence.
Can you imagine a modern politician doing this? It would be like a president or a Fortune 500 CEO stepping down, opening all their financial records, their private emails, their tax returns, projecting them on a screen for the entire public and saying, "Find one single cent that I misappropriated. Find one single instance where I used my authority to enrich myself or crush someone beneath me. If you find it, I will pay you back right now."
Right, it would never happen.
The silence from the crowd would usually be deafening, where the accusations would fly. But here, the entire nation responds in unison. "Thou hast not defrauded us, nor oppressed us, neither hast thou taken aught of any man's hand."
The core wisdom here is the immense, unassailable power of a clear conscience. Samuel doesn't initiate this audit to stroke his own ego or fish for compliments. He does it to establish absolute moral authority. Because his hands are clean, his words carry weight. He is about to deliver some incredibly hard truths to the nation, and they cannot dismiss his critique by attacking his character.
Right, because if he was corrupt like his sons, they would just shout him down. But they can't. So what does he say to them?
He gives them a sweeping historical review. He reminds them of God's faithfulness, mentioning Moses, Aaron, and the various judges who delivered them from oppressors like Sisera and the Philistines. He mentions a judge named Bidden, which Matthew Henry suggests might have been another name for Samson, or perhaps Jair. Samuel traces this endless cycle. The people rebel, they suffer under foreign oppression, they cry out to God, God sends a deliverer, and they are saved. But then Samuel turns the mirror directly onto them regarding their recent actions. He points out that when they saw Nahash the Ammonite threatening them, instead of trusting the divine system that had sustained them for centuries, they panicked and demanded a human king.
He essentially tells them that their demand was an act of profound wickedness. But he knows words alone won't penetrate their euphoria over the recent victory. So he calls for a demonstration.
Yeah, this is the crazy part.
He says, "Is it not wheat harvest today? I will call unto the Lord, and he shall send thunder and rain, that you may perceive and see that your wickedness is great."
To understand the weight of this, you have to understand the meteorology of the region. The wheat harvest in ancient Israel occurs in the summer, which is entirely a dry season. It does not rain, ever. It would be like experiencing a blizzard in the Sahara Desert. Furthermore, rain during the wheat harvest would be an agricultural catastrophe, potentially ruining the crops they needed to survive the year. It's an impossible, terrifying request. And immediately, God answers.
Just like that.
Just like that. The thunder rolls, the rain crashes down, and the people are absolutely paralyzed with fear. They realize the cosmic weight of what they have done. They cry out to Samuel, "Pray for thy servants unto the Lord thy God, that we die not. For we have added unto all our sins this evil, to ask us a king."
Now this brings up a major hurdle for modern readers. The idea of divine judgment or the concept of fear being used as a legitimate motivator makes us deeply uncomfortable. We live in an era that prefers our spirituality to be exclusively comforting, therapeutic, and affirming. A prophet calling down a terrifying thunderstorm to scare people into realizing they were wrong feels harsh and archaic.
It does feel abrasive to modern sensibilities. However, the text is insisting on a countercultural but psychologically profound reality. Sometimes experiencing the thunder of consequences is absolutely necessary for true course correction.
Right.
Matthew Henry observes in his commentary that some people simply will not be brought to a side of their sins by any gentler methods than storms. When we are arrogant, when we are coasting on a recent success, gentle advice bounces right off of us. Realizing the actual gravity of our mistakes, feeling the weight, the terror of the consequences is often the only thing that shakes us out of our complacency. We rarely change until the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. The thunder provided that necessary pain.
But the beauty of the text is that it doesn't end with the terror. Once the people are broken and repentant, Samuel pivots completely. He says, "Fear not, ye have done all this wickedness, yet turn not aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart."
Yeah, he reassures them.
He tells them that the past is the past, but the future depends on their obedience moving forward. And then he delivers one of the most convicting lines in the entire book. The people have just begged him to pray for them, and Samuel replies, "God forbid that I should sin against the Lord in ceasing to pray for you, but I will teach you the good and the right way."
That is wisdom with deep discernment. Think about the human dynamic here. These people essentially fired Samuel. They looked at a lifetime of his flawless leadership, looked at his corrupt kids, and said, "We want a new system." Samuel had every human right to hold a massive grudge. He had every right to say, "You wanted a king, you got him. Deal with the storm yourselves. I'm retiring."
The urge to say, "I told you so," and walk away would be overwhelming.
Exactly. But Samuel views abandoning them as a sin against God. He demonstrates that enduring love and intercession must outlast personal rejection. He refuses to cancel them. He promises to keep praying for them and advising them, even though they rejected his leadership.
That is a staggering level of emotional maturity. If you were listening, think about the relationships in your life where your ego has been bruised. Who is someone who has ignored your advice? Maybe it's a family member making a terrible financial decision, or a colleague taking a project in a direction you know will fail.
Yeah, we all have someone like that.
When they reject your input, the natural instinct is to wash your hands of them, step back, and silently wait for them to crash so you can be vindicated. But how can you apply Samuel's wisdom? How can you continue to pray for or actively support their ultimate well-being, even from a distance, when your pride is hurting? How do you maintain love in the face of rejection?
It requires a fundamental shift from ego-driven leadership to servant leadership. But unfortunately, the profound maturity we see in Samuel as he exits the stage is about to be sharply contrasted by the rapid decline of Saul as he takes it. We are moving into chapters 13 and 14.
Yeah, the honeymoon is officially over.
It really is. The cracks in Saul's foundation are about to be exposed under immense pressure.
And the pressure is unimaginable. Saul has a son named Jonathan, who is a brilliant, aggressive military commander. Jonathan launches a daring raid and takes out a Philistine garrison at Geba. The Philistines do not take this lightly. They mobilize a retaliation force that sounds like something out of a myth.
Yeah, it's massive.
The text says they gather 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and foot soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. It is a completely overwhelming existential threat.
And this brings us back to the scenario we opened the deep dive with. The psychological terror of this massive army is compounded by that devastating technological disparity. The Philistine monopoly on metallurgy meant the Israelites had no modern weapons. They had been intentionally kept in an agrarian state.
Right, the farming equipment against chariots scenario.
Exactly. To put this in modern terms, it would be like a nation trying to fight a modern superpower without access to microchips, satellites, or refined fuel. The supply chain was completely controlled by the enemy. The Israelites realized they're sitting ducks.
The panic is absolute. The Israelite army, which just chapters ago was 330,000 strong and victorious, completely evaporates. The text says the people hide themselves in caves, in thickets, in rocks, in high places, and in pits. Some are so terrified they literally abandon the country and flee across the Jordan River. Saul is stationed at Gilgal, watching his forces dwindle by the hour.
Now, we have to recall a specific command Samuel gave Saul way back when he first anointed him. Samuel had told Saul, "Go down before me to Gilgal, and behold, I will come down unto thee to offer burnt offerings and to sacrifice sacrifices of peace offerings. 7 days shalt thou tarry till I come to thee and show thee what thou shalt do."
Right.
This wasn't a suggestion. It was a strict mandate dictating how the king must operate in submission to divine direction.
So Saul goes to Gilgal, and he waits. He waits the full 7 days. But Samuel doesn't show up. The deadline arrives, and the prophet is a no-show. The troops are scattering, the chariots are massing, and Saul is losing total control of the narrative. So out of sheer desperation to stop the bleeding and boost morale, Saul makes an executive decision.
Yeah, he takes matters into his own hands.
He says, "Bring hither a burnt offering to me and peace offerings." And he takes it upon himself to perform the priestly sacrifice.
And the tragic irony is that the very instant he finishes offering the burnt offering, Samuel walks into the camp.
Ouch.
Samuel looks at what has happened and demands, "What hast thou done?" When Saul gives his excuses, Samuel delivers a crushing, fatal blow. "Thou hast done foolishly. Thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God. For now would the Lord have established thy kingdom upon Israel forever, but now thy kingdom shall not continue."
I am going to push back incredibly hard on this, because every time I read this chapter, Samuel seems wildly unreasonable. I mean, let's look at this purely pragmatically. Put yourselves in Saul's sandals. He is the commander-in-chief facing annihilation. He actually followed the rule. He waited the 7 days. Samuel's the one who was late. Saul's army was deserting. He made a tough, necessary executive decision in a crisis to perform a religious ritual to unify his men and seek divine favor. Any modern military general or corporate CEO would praise his initiative. He was being proactive. Why is this action so deeply fatal that it cost him his entire dynasty?
It is the central tension of the chapter, and it is a brilliant question. To understand why this is fatal, we have to look past the pragmatism and examine the underlying pathology of fear and presumption that Saul exhibits. Let's break down the exact words of Saul's excuse.
Okay, let's look at them.
When Samuel asks what he's done, Saul replies, "Because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that thou camest not within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash. Therefore, said I, the Philistines will come down now upon me to Gilgal, and I have not made supplication unto the Lord. I forced myself, therefore, and offered a burnt offering." Listen to that phrase. I forced myself.
It sounds like he's playing the victim of his own choices. Like, I didn't want to break the rules, but the circumstances made me do it.
Exactly. Matthew Henry points out that Saul's excuses reveal a deeply flawed theology. Saul was treating God like a cosmic vending machine. He believed that the mechanical ritual of the sacrifice was what produced military success, rather than the character of obedience. He overstepped the strict boundaries of his authority, usurping the role of the priest out of pure panic. The core wisdom here is that pragmatism and panic do not justify compromising your core principles.
So the test wasn't really about the 7 days. The test was about what happens on the 8th day when the pressure is unbearable.
Precisely. Saul's test wasn't about whether he physically knew how to offer a sheep on an altar. It was a pressure test of his foundation. Could he hold the line of obedience when everything in his environment, the ticking clock, the fleeing army, the delayed prophet, was screaming at him to seize control?
And he couldn't.
He failed the pressure test. The hidden rot below the waterline of his character was exposed. He ultimately feared the loss of his army's approval more than he feared disobeying the mandate he was given.
That is a brutal but necessary mirror for all of us. Modern translation. How often do we compromise our ethics because the clock was ticking or everyone was leaving? You see this everywhere in the professional world.
But constantly.
Think of massive corporate scandals. When the executives get caught, their defense is almost always a version of Saul's excuse. We had to falsify the quarterly earnings report, otherwise the investors would pull out and the company would collapse. We had to cut corners on the safety testing protocols because the launch date was tomorrow and our competitors were beating us to market. We excuse fundamental breaches of integrity by pointing to external pressure. But true character is holding the line when the pressure is at its absolute maximum, not just when following the rules is easy and convenient.
That is the exact parallel. Saul justified a breach of foundational principle with an appeal to practical necessity. And the message of the text is that the foundation of a lasting kingdom or a lasting life must be unwavering integrity, not pragmatic compromise.
If you are listening to this, here is where the rubber meets the road. Identify a current situation in your life where you feel immense pressure to cut a corner, break a promise, or rush a boundary because of external panic. Maybe it's a terrifying financial pressure. Maybe it's an impossible timeline at work that your boss dropped on you. Maybe it's the pressure to settle in a relationship because you feel the clock ticking.
Yeah, that internal panic.
Notice that little voice inside your head saying, I have to force myself to do this right now, even though I know it violates my principles, because if I don't, everything will fall apart. When you hear that voice, commit to waiting the metaphorical seventh day and beyond. Hold the line. Trust that maintaining your integrity is vastly more valuable than securing a short-term, panic-driven fix.
It is the hardest kind of waiting. And unfortunately for Saul, his inability to handle pressure only deepens as we move into the final act of our narrative. We arrive at chapter 15. This is the climax of Saul's tragic arc. He is given one final, definitive test of obedience.
And before we get into the details of this specific mission, we need to pause and establish a vital boundary for our discussion.
Good point.
The mission Samuel gives Saul involves executing a brutal judgment on a nation called the Amalekites. The command is for the complete and utter destruction of the people and their livestock. To a modern ear, reading ancient mandates of total warfare, essentially wiping out a population, is deeply jarring, uncomfortable, and morally disturbing.
It absolutely is.
It is crucial to state clearly that we are analyzing this ancient text strictly as it is written to extract the author's intended moral lessons regarding Saul's obedience and leadership mechanics. We are not here to debate the ethics of ancient warfare, nor are we endorsing or attempting to justify the ancient concept of holy war for any modern context. We are focusing entirely on how Saul responds to a direct, unambiguous mandate.
That is an essential framework. Keeping our focus on the narrative mechanics, the historical context of the Amalekite conflict is significant. The Amalekites were not a random target. They were facing a delayed reckoning for a historical atrocity. Centuries earlier, when the Israelites were fleeing Egypt as vulnerable refugees, the Amalekites launched a brutal, cowardly ambush, specifically targeting the weakest, sickest, and hindmost of the Israelite camp.
Okay, so there is history there.
Yes. So, Samuel delivers God's command to Saul: execute justice for this ancient crime, utterly destroy Amalek, spare no one, and destroy all the livestock. Do not take any spoil.
The instructions could not be clearer. It's a mandate for total destruction, not a raid for economic enrichment. So Saul mobilizes a massive army, 210,000 men. He marches to the city of Amalek, lays an ambush in the valley, and systematically defeats them. He wins the war.
He wins the war, but he fails the mandate. The text explicitly tells us what happened. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep and of the oxen and of the fatlings and the lambs and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them. But everything that was vile and refuse, that they destroyed utterly.
So they kept the good stuff. They captured King Agag alive, likely as a political trophy, to parade around and show off Saul's power. And they kept the premium livestock. They only destroyed the sickly, worthless animals that weren't worth hauling back anyway.
This partial execution of the command is the breaking point. The word of the Lord comes to Samuel with devastating finality. It repenteth me that I have set up Saul to be king, for he is turned back from following me and hath not performed my commandments.
Wow.
Samuel is so grieved, so angry and heartbroken over this failure that he cries out to the Lord all night long. The next morning, he travels to Gilgal to confront Saul. And what follows is perhaps one of the most masterful, psychologically piercing dialogues in ancient literature. It is an autopsy of human rationalization.
It really is. It's painfully relatable. Saul sees Samuel walking into the camp, and Saul immediately goes on the offensive. He greets Samuel with this enthusiastic, almost sickeningly cheerful demeanor. He says, "Blessed be thou of the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord."
Right, trying to get ahead of it.
It's a blatant, brazen lie, but he says it with absolute confidence. He knows he kept the spoil, but he's trying to preempt any criticism by acting incredibly pious.
He's trying to manage the optics, but Samuel doesn't yell. He doesn't scream. He simply cuts right through the facade with one brilliant, piercing question. He asks, "What meaneth then this bleating of the sheep in mine ears and the lowing of the oxen which I hear?"
Ouch. The evidence of his treason is literally making noise in the background. You cannot stand there and claim you destroy everything when the sheep you stole are bleeding right behind you. It's the ancient equivalent of having a hot microphone catch you in a lie. So when Saul realizes he is caught, how does he react? He does what every cornered leader does. He shifts the blame.
The anatomy of his excuse is fascinating. Saul replies, "They have brought them from the Amalekites. For the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed." Pay very close attention to the pronouns he uses.
Yeah, let me guess.
They brought them, the people spared the best, but the rest we have utterly destroyed. He attempts to take credit for the obedience while simultaneously throwing his subordinates under the bus for the disobedience.
It's cowardly leadership 101. But he adds an extra layer of manipulation. He tries to spiritualize his disobedience. He claims that the only reason they spared the premium animals was for a noble religious purpose, to sacrifice them to God.
It is the ultimate rationalization. He is effectively saying, yes, I broke the strict rules of the mandate, but I did it for a really good cause. I did it for the church. I did it for God. And Samuel has zero tolerance for this. Samuel recounts the exact mission Saul was given, points out that Saul swooped down on the plunder like a bird of prey, and asks why he disobeyed.
And Saul doubles down.
He does. He stubbornly insists he obeyed, again blaming the people for taking the spoil to sacrifice. And this is when Samuel delivers the defining core wisdom of this entire text.
This is the moment that echoes through history. What does he say?
Samuel replies, "Hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry." Matthew Henry's commentary here is incredibly sharp. He emphasizes that doing something ostensibly good or religious, like offering a massive sacrifice, can never cancel out a fundamental breach of integrity. God doesn't want the sheep you acquire through disobedience. He wants a surrendered, obedient heart.
If we translate it into modern terms, it's about the futility of trying to buy off your conscience. You cannot embezzle millions of dollars from your company, destroy people's pensions, get caught by the feds, and then expect the judge to give you a lighter sentence because you donated 10% of the stolen money to an orphanage. Doing a good deed with dirty hands does not make you righteous. Partial obedience, especially when it is motivated by greed or the desire to look good, is just disobedience wearing a tuxedo. It's a cover-up.
Exactly. Samuel exposes the root of the issue. Saul's true motivation wasn't piety, it was fear. Saul eventually cracks under the weight of Samuel's prophetic authority and confesses, "I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and thy words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice."
He feared the people more than God.
Right. He wanted to be popular more than he wanted to be principled. And because he rejected the word of the Lord, Samuel declares that God has rejected him from being king.
And the tragic, pathetic end to this encounter reveals the absolute emptiness of Saul's character. He has just been told he is losing his kingdom, his dynasty is shattered, his relationship with the divine is broken. He begs for forgiveness, but listen to his primary driving concern. He says to Samuel, "I have sinned, yet honor me now, I pray thee, before the elders of my people and before Israel."
Unbelievable.
He is spiritually bankrupt, but his biggest concern is optics. He just wants to save face in front of the politicians. He doesn't want to look weak walking back into the camp.
It is the hollow desperation of a man entirely driven by image. He has no internal anger left. As Samuel turns to leave, rejecting Saul's plea, Saul desperately grabs the skirt of Samuel's mantle and the fabric tears in his hand. Samuel immediately uses the torn fabric as a final, irreversible prophetic sign. "The Lord hath rent the kingdom of Israel from thee this day, and hath given it to a neighbor of thine that is better than thou."
A permanent visual aid.
Yeah. Samuel then proceeds to finish the grim job Saul refused to do, executing King Agag himself. And then they part ways. The text notes that Samuel came no more to see Saul until the day of his death.
The relationship is permanently severed.
It is. Yet the text adds a profoundly human postscript. Nevertheless, Samuel mourned for Saul. Even after all the deception, all the failure, all the arrogance, the prophet wept for the man who threw away so much potential.
It's a heavy, haunting ending, but it demands reflection. When we look at Saul's excuses, it's uncomfortable because we recognize ourselves in them. So for you listening right now, where in your life are you practicing partial obedience. Where are you keeping the best of the sheep? Meaning, are you holding on to a destructive habit, nurturing a lingering grudge, or leveraging an unethical advantage at work, all while loudly claiming that you are a good, principled person overall?
Right. Are you faking it?
Are you trying to cover up a fundamental breach of integrity with a showy public good deed or a charitable donation? We have to be honest with ourselves about the bleeding sheep in the background of our lives. You can't hide your compromises forever.
That is the hard, necessary work of self-examination. And it brings us to a final, provocative thought to carry with you from this deep dive. Think about the tragedy of King Saul. He was given every conceivable advantage. He had the height, the striking cinematic looks, the undeniable military tactical skill to execute brilliant dawn raids, and he even possessed genuine, relatable humility in his early days when he was hiding in the baggage.
He had it all.
He did, but he lacked the one critical, irreplaceable thing that sustains a legacy, an inward anchor of unwavering integrity. When the extreme pressure hit, whether it was the ticking clock of a delayed prophet, the terror of 30,000 chariots, or the greedy demands of his own victorious troops, he folded, he compromised. He shifted the blame. It forces every single one of us to confront a vital question. Are we building our lives solely on how we look to the crowd? Or are we building our lives on who we are in the dark, when the prophet is delayed, the army is scattering, and there is absolutely nobody around to validate us?
It all circles back to where we place our trust. You can spend your entire life polishing your image, accumulating wealth, and ensuring everyone admires your status. You can have the height, the looks, and the quarter shekels to pay your way through the world. But if you rely on partial obedience, if you let fear and pragmatism dictate your core principles, and if you care more about honoring yourself before the elders than maintaining a clear conscience, the storm will eventually find you. Don't just build a life that looks impressive in calm waters. Build a life with the deep, hidden character required to survive the storm. That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.